Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez and you can find me on Twitter at JRFromPTC. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the top new features in Adobe Photoshop CC 2015. There's actually some big changes in this release, especially if you're a designer, but there's still something new for everyone as well. After you watch this tutorial, don't forget to head over to my website, PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com, or you can type in my new short URL, ptcvids.com, and read all about the smaller changes not covered in this video. Okay, now let's check out the new features in Adobe Photoshop CC 2015. One new feature that photographers are going to enjoy is the dehaze feature. And I'm going to show you how it works with this image. This is a photograph I took in Costa Rica, and as you can see, it contains a lot of haze. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert it into a smart object. Then I'm going to apply the Camera Raw filter. If you have a RAW file, you can just open up your RAW file directly from Adobe Bridge, and you'll open up Camera Raw, and this is what it looks like. If you click on the FX icon, you'll see this new slider called dehaze. If you click and drag over to the left, you can add haze. If you click and drag to the right, you'll decrease the haze. And I'm going to drag this all the way up to 100. Then I'm going to press OK. Photoshop then goes and removes as much haze as it can. We can actually apply that filter again. So if I go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, I'm going to try to remove more of that haze. So I'm going to click on the FX icon again and drag this over to the right even further. So maybe right about here. If we go too far, the image might be a little too dark, but that may not work. So I'm actually going to leave that there, and I'm just going to press OK. So if I click on this eye icon next to the smart filter, you'll see the before and the after. As you can see, it's a big difference, and we achieve this result simply by dragging the slider to the right. Another new feature in Camera Raw 9.1 is the addition of the black and white sliders and localized adjustments. Let me show you how those work. I'm going to add yet another Camera Raw filter. And this time I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to paint in this area here. And you'll see that there is now a black and white adjustment slider on a localized adjustment. So I can play with the black and whites of that particular area, or I can paint on other areas to continue with the black and white adjustments. I'm just going to cancel that because I didn't really want to apply that effect to this particular image, but I did want to bring up those sliders to your attention. In this video, I'm going to show you one of the new features found in Photo Merge, which is the Content Aware checkbox. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to go into File, Automate, Photo Merge, and I'm going to select several images to create a panoramic shot. So I have these photographs here that I took in Costa Rica. I'm going to press OK, and I have my raw files in Photo Merge. The new checkbox is down here, Content Aware Fill Transparent Areas. This means that Photoshop will look at the transparent areas that are created while merging these images and fill it with Content Aware. I'm going to press OK, and Photoshop is going to analyze the images and create one single panoramic shot. And this is going to take some time because I'm working with high resolution raw files. Okay, Photoshop has completed creating the panoramic shot, and you'll notice that the areas that were filled in with Content Aware are currently selected. If you look off to the side here, the topmost layer has in parentheses the word merge. That means that Photoshop took all the images that created this panorama, merged it into a layer, and filled in these areas with Content Aware. That way we have no transparent pixels. And as you can see, Photoshop did a really good job. I'm going to press Control D, Command D on the Mac to deselect, and I'm going to zoom into the image, and you'll see that in pretty much every area, Photoshop did a really good job at generating those pixels. The only place that you might notice that it's not 100% accurate is in the shingles here on top of the roof, and it'd be best if we maybe clone from one of these areas and then just added some of these back in there like so. I'm going to zoom out, And what you can do now is take advantage of another new feature in Photoshop, which we looked at earlier, which is the dehaze feature. So I'm going to go into the Camera Raw filter so I can apply Camera Raw as a filter. And I can go into the FX icon and maybe dehaze this image a little bit. That way it brings out some of the clouds and water, and maybe come back into my basic adjustments and brighten up those shadows so we can get a little more detail. I'm going to press OK, and now we have our final image. One tool that got another feature added to it was the Content Aware Move tool. With the Content Aware Move tool, you can now scale your selections. So I'm going to click on the Content Aware Move tool, found nested under the Spot Healing Brush tool, and I'm going to make a selection of the contents I want to move. After you make your selection, you can click and drag him. So I'm going to place him back here, and I'm going to scale him down. I'm going to hold Shift to keep it constrained, and maybe about that size, and find an appropriate place to place him. Maybe right about here. Press Enter. I'm going to press Control D to deselect, Command D on the Mac, and now he's further back than he was before. So the ability to scale with the Content Aware Move tool is one of the new additions. I'm going to undo that change, and I'm going to bring him back to his original location. And I want to talk about two other enhancements in Photoshop. The first one is with the Healing Brush tool. If you use the Healing Brush tool, you can see the adjustments happen on the fly. You don't have to wait till you finish painting over to the selection that you want to adjust. So you can see how the Healing Brush tool is going to affect your photograph right away. And this is the same thing in Photoshop CS6 Extended. Notice that we only get the preview, but we don't actually get the result until we release the mouse button after painting over the area. I'm going to undo these changes, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how much quicker the Healing Brush tool is. So I have a Healing Brush tool, and I'm just going to start painting the areas that I want to heal, and I'm going to release. Notice how much faster that was and how much better it was than Photoshop CS6 Extended using the same tool. And I can click once more to get rid of that dot there in the middle. So the Content Aware tool is much faster and better than before. One of my favorite additions to Photoshop CC 2015 is the addition to noise in the blur gallery. To show you how that works, we're going to use this image here that I took in Costa Rica. If we zoom in, we see that there is some noise in the photograph. If I zoom out and apply a blur gallery effect, iris blur, and I can center my blur on the raccoon, I'm just going to bump the blur way up so you can see how this works. If I zoom in and I accidentally move the blur off of him, so I'll just move it back. But if I zoom in, you'll see that the blurry areas lost the noise. Of course, the image is blur. But in Photoshop CC 2015, we have the noise panel. If you click on that, you can add grain, and you can increase the amount of grain and try to match the digital grain onto the grain that was originally in the image. You can maybe decrease the size. I think this grain looks just a little bit smaller. And you can play around with the amount of grain till you find something that matches. And when you're done, you can simply press OK, and now your blur will be more realistic because it contains some of that film grain that the original image contained. A new addition to Photoshop CC 2015 the designers are going to enjoy is the Glyphs panel. It's very similar to the Glyphs panel in other Adobe applications like InDesign. To bring up the Glyphs panel, you need to go into Window and click on Glyphs. Then the Glyphs panel comes up, and what you can do with this panel is look at all the characters that a font contains. This drop-down menu here allows you to choose a font. You can choose the style of that font. We'll just leave it at regular for this example. And then you can click on the Type tool and select a character, and you can choose something like alternate for font selection. This will show you alternates for whatever you currently have selected, in this case the number 0. So I can double click on the 0 with the slash through it to switch that font. Not every character has an alternate character. For example, if I highlight the letter C, notice that there's nothing in the alternates. I can also come into this drop-down menu and choose entire font to see all the characters in that font, or I can display them by category. For example, punctuation, dashes and quotes, symbols, and designer favorites. If you want to add a character, just simply click in the section where you want to add the character and double click on the character in the box and it will appear on your text. In Photoshop CC 2015, layer styles got a major upgrade. Let me show you how they work. I have two layers here, a background layer, which is gray, and a text layer. I'm going to double click off to the side on the text layer to bring up the layer style window. If you notice, the left hand side column is completely different than it was in previous versions. We now have this plus sign next to some layer styles, and we also have different icons here in the bottom. Let me show you how they work. In Photoshop CC 2015, you can now create multiple instances of the same layer style. For example, stroke. I'm going to apply a stroke. I'm going to make the stroke red, and I'm going to change the position to outside. Then I'm going to increase the size, and as you can see, my text now has a red stroke. If I click on the plus sign, I add a second stroke. There's one in the top, one in the bottom. The one on top, I can now switch to maybe white and then decrease the size, and you'll see that we now have two strokes, a white one and a red one. These additional layer styles work a lot like layers, where the one on top hides the one below it, assuming that opacity is 100% and blend mode is at normal. You can also click on these layer styles and use the arrows here at the bottom to change the positioning. So if I click on the red stroke and then click on this icon here, it's going to push it to the top. So now the white stroke is below the red one. If I increase the size, you'll see the white stroke around the text. And I can again push that one on top of the red one again if I want to, or bring it back down by using these arrows here. You can also delete layer styles. For example, this white stroke. If I click on this trash can icon, I delete that stroke. I can actually delete the first one as well, and I can also delete layer styles that have not been applied, for example, bevel and emboss. In fact, if I click on this FX icon, I can delete hidden effects, which means that I'll delete every effect that I have not applied. In this case, I had no effects applied, so all the layer styles get deleted. But I can easily bring them back by selecting them from the list. For example, I can choose stroke again, or maybe drop shadow, or I can simply click on show all effects and all the effects come back. One of the ways that I see these new layer styles being beneficial is with drop shadows. I'm going to disable the stroke for now, and we're going to work with the drop shadow. But before I do that, I'm going to click on styles, and I'm just going to find a style that'll stylize my text. So I'm going to click on this icon here and select text effects, then press OK. And the one that I'm looking for is this one right here. I just wanted to have a bevel and a gradient just so we can work with something that looks more like stylized text. And what I'm going to do now is add a drop shadow, and first I'm going to click and drag the shadow and just put it past the text, and I'm going to increase the opacity to about 92%, so it's really dark, and I'm going to decrease the size. Then I'm going to add a second shadow, and the one below it is going to go out past further, but I'm going to increase the size and bring down the opacity. Then I'm going to create a third shadow, and this one I'm going to push on the right side. But before I do that, I got to make sure that use global light is unchecked. So let me just put the original back where I had it, which is right about there. Use global light, and I'm going to click and drag this over to the right, bring down the opacity even more, and increase the size. Then I'm going to press OK. If I zoom in, you'll see that the shadows are much more realistic, because now I have a darker shadow closer to the text, which could be something like a contact shadow, and then a lighter shadow outside of that, and then on the opposite side have a much lighter shadow. And in previous versions of Photoshop, this is sort of the effect that I would have gotten, just one drop shadow. But by stacking shadows together, you get a much more realistic effect. So You can get very creative with the new additions to layer styles in Photoshop CC 2015. One of the biggest changes in Adobe Photoshop CC 2015 is the addition of artboards. Artboards have been around in Illustrator for a really long time, but they're now in Photoshop. If you're not familiar with artboards, I'm going to take a couple minutes and show you how they work. First, I'm going to show you what the old process of designing an application would be like, and then I'll show you the benefit of artboards in that process. I have a quick mock-up here of an app, and in this section of the app, we can enter our personal information, and maybe we wanted to create a calendar page. The icon is here. The old way of working is we would take the group, duplicate it, and then work from that group. So we can come in with the text tool. I'm going to press T on the keyboard, and I would change the title of the page to calendar, delete the info folder because I don't need it in this page of the app, and then I would bring assets from other files, for example this calendar file here, so I can click on the move tool, click and drag that into the calendar page that I'm working at now. Now I have the info page of my app, and I have the calendar page. And besides creating layer comps or creating more groups, there's no real way of having multiple versions of the same thing in one Photoshop file. And that's where artboards come in. They allow you to create different canvases in one file so you can create multiple versions of the same thing. In this example, we're creating an app and we want the different versions to be different pages of this app. But you could also be designing a website and you could use one artboard for the design of the desktop version, one artboard for the design of the tablet version, and another artboard for the design of the mobile version. So let me show you how artboards work. I'm going to go ahead and delete that new group I created, and I'm back to the original file. To create an artboard, you can go into File, New, and in the New window, under Document Type, you can select Artboard. But I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to show you that that was there. You could also go into the Layer menu, go to New, and you can create an artboard, which is the same thing as you would have gotten from the File, New menu. You can also create an artboard from Groups, in artboard from layers. Currently I have this info group, so I'm going to select artboard from group. And notice that the canvas completely changed. Now we have this white in the background, and we have the word info right above our artboard. You can see our artboard here, info. If I click on this, you'll see the contents of my artboard. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this artboard, and I can do that several ways. One of the easiest ways is by having the artboard tool selected, which is nested under the move tool, and you can hold Alt, Option on the Mac, click and drag that over. If you hold Shift, you keep it on the same horizontal line, and then release. So now I have two artboards. I have the info artboard and the info copy artboard. Notice the layers panel, info copy. I can change the name of that to calendar. And notice that the name changes right above the artboard, so we know exactly what artboard we're working with. If I click on one of the artboards, you'll notice the black outline. Then I can click on the calendar arrow, delete the info section, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in the calendar group that contains the graphic. I'm going to select the move tool, click and drag that over onto the calendar artboard. Notice that when I release the calendar graphic, it gets cut off here. That's because this is a lot like a canvas where it's contained in this area. I can actually click and drag this over onto the info artboard if I want to, but I don't want it here because this graphic belongs on the calendar artboard. So I'm going to click on that and drag it back over onto the artboard that we're working with. If you notice, when I was moving that group around, you saw it change from the calendar artboard onto the info artboard. I'm going to go ahead and do that again so you can see that. I'm going to click and drag this over onto the info artboard. Notice that it disappears from the calendar. I'm going to go ahead and open up the info artboard so we can see the contents, and you can see the calendar folder in here. I can also click and drag that over onto the calendar artboard, and it's now in this artboard. Notice that it did not stay outside of the artboard hidden. It brought it back to the center of the artboard. Notice what happens if I click and drag this to the top right of the calendar artboard, and I click and drag the group onto the info artboard. It's in the same position that we had it on the calendar artboard. So I'm going to click and drag that calendar group and put it where it belongs and put that here. So I'm going to zoom out, and now we have 2 pages of our app in the same file. I can go ahead and create even more artboards if I wanted to. I'm going to click on the artboard tool, click and drag while holding Alt to create a 3rd page. I can keep creating as many artboards as I need that will represent my app, and that way I have all the assets of my design on one file. Another way of creating an artboard is by using the artboard tool. You can click and drag and just make an artboard. If you're unhappy with the size, you can always click on the handles and adjust the size or adjust the positioning of that artboard. And with the art tool selected, in the options panel, you can click and select a custom size. For example, we're working on the iPhone 6 size currently, so I would select that, but I could also choose something else, maybe like a web size 1280 by 800. And I could place that on here if I wanted to. You can also press the delete key to delete an artboard. Before I finish up with artboards, I quickly wanted to show you one thing. If you use artboards with smart objects, then you really increase your productivity. I have this smart object here called main color. If I click and drag that off to the side, I can now double click on the main color smart object, and it's going to open up this solid color that is the blue that we're using. And if I double click on it and maybe select red, press OK, then I can go into File, Save, come back into the artboard sample PSD that I'm working with. You'll notice that the red is now applied to my design. And the way I did that was by duplicating the smart object and either clipping it to something else. For example, I'm going to clip it to the date. So I'm going to press Ctrl Alt G and clip it to the calendar group. Notice that now that red is applied. So when you duplicate a smart object, you create another instance of that same smart object. So if you change the color or making adjustments to one smart object, it affects all the others. I'll do that one more time just so you can see. I'm going to click on the main color smart object. I'm going to press Ctrl J to duplicate it. And now I'm going to go into the calendar and put that under the ellipse copy that I have here, and also clip that by pressing Ctrl Alt G. Notice how now the red is applied onto that circle. If I come back into any of the smart objects, I don't necessarily have to click on the main color smart object. They're all the same, really. I'm going to click on one of the duplicates here. It brings me back into that solid that I was working with, and I can change the color to maybe green this time. And I'm going to press Ctrl S, Command S on the Mac to save, and come back into my artboards, and all the artboards get updated simply by using a smart object and the new artboards in Photoshop. Photoshop CC 2015 has a new way in which you can save your files. You no longer have the Save for the Web menu option. Instead, you have this export option here. You can click on Export As to bring up the export window, and you can export your files as PNG, JPEG, PNG 8, GIF, and SVG. After you select your format, then you can adjust the quality, width, height, and scale of the images that you're exporting. If you have multiple artboards, you can set different settings for each of the artboards. So I can, for example, leave this one as a JPEG and this next one as a PNG. Then I can click on the export button, and I can decide where I want to save this image in my computer. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that for now. And I'm going to cancel this as well. If you do miss the Save for the Web, you can still access that. You can go into File, Export, Save for the Web Legacy. Click on that, and it brings up the old Save for the Web window that you're used to. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. You also have export preferences. You can reach them here under Export Preferences, and you can select the quick export format, PNG, JPEG, and depending on what option you select, you'll get different settings. For example, with JPEG, you get quality, and where you're going to do the quick export to. You can ask where to export each time, or export those files into an asset folder where the current document resides. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to go into File, Export, and I can do a quick export, and the settings that I have under export preferences will apply, and that's where those files would go. And this is the new way in which you can export your files in Photoshop. In this release of the Creative Cloud, Adobe released a new service. It is called Adobe Stock. It is a place where you can purchase stock photos and illustrations. And the reason we're going to talk about it in this video is because it integrates really good with Photoshop, so I'll show you how that works. But before we go any further, I just want to explain that at least at the time of this recording, this is not a free service for the Creative Cloud. Currently, it's $29 a month and you get 10 images. If you are not a member of the Creative Cloud, you can still get Adobe Stock, but it's $49.99 a month. And what I'm about to show you wouldn't apply because you need Photoshop CC 2015 in order to do what I'm about to show you. So I just wanted to throw that out there. This may change, but at least at the time of this recording, this is what it is. So pricing aside, this is actually a very good addition to Photoshop. I believe if you're a designer, you probably buy a lot of stock images. And let me show you how it works and how it integrates with Photoshop. Maybe you're looking for stock images of clouds, so I'm just going to type in the word clouds. I'm going to click on go, and you're going to get a whole bunch of pictures of clouds. If you see an image that you like, maybe like this one, you can hover over this down pointing arrow, and you can save a preview to your desktop, but even better yet, you can create a new Creative Cloud library. And I'll just call this library Clouds. And I'm just going to click on the plus button, and it's going to create the library and save this image onto my library. I can keep looking at different photos. Maybe this one, this is another nice one, so I'll click on that. And now it's going to save it into my Clouds library. And I can save as many images as I want onto my Creative Cloud library. If I go back into Photoshop, you'll see that under libraries I have the Clouds library. So I can click on that and you'll see that I only have one other library called my library, and the one I just created, Clouds, and the images that I selected. So I can use any one of these on any project that we're working with. Let me just create a new file here. So I'm just gonna create that. I can click on any one of these, click and drag those over onto the composition. Photoshop is going to tell us that this is going to be a Link Smart object, and that's because these files are going to contain a watermark. We haven't purchased a photograph yet. We can actually start creating a composition using these images with watermarks, and when we're ready to purchase them, we can, and we get the full resolution image. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to click on the crop tool, and I'm just going to crop this and match the size. And what I'm going to do now is maybe I can take this second image and just put it on top of that, and we can just make a really quick design out of this. I'm just going to just make a selection, and I'm going to mask that out by holding Alt, Option on the Mac, masking that out, and bringing this layer down and this one back up. So now we have a composition based on these images. And actually I'll move this one over a bit just so it matches the sun. If you decide that you like your composition and you want to use this image, you can right click and select license image, and Photoshop will automatically download a high resolution version of this file and replace it with this Link Smart object. If you, however, merge all the layers, I just selected all of them by holding Shift and clicking on all the layers, then pressing Control E to merge. Now we have one layer. By doing so, we lost Link Smart object. So at this point, even if I license the image, I will have to recreate the entire composition again. So I'm just going to undo the flattening of the file and just mention that if you decide to make compositions this way, make sure that they're Link Smart objects to the cloud, and you can see the icon here reminding you that it's still a Link Smart object to the Creative Cloud. That way, if you do decide to keep the images, you can just do the swap with the high resolution images. And that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you have any questions, please leave them down below, and I'll talk to you again next time.